Well, that's not too dramatic. I don't think this is going to go well.
If I'm more scared, startled, jostled by watching somebody replay this game on my phone late at night, you have a problem.
Hi, I'm Teresa. Welcome to Cocoon Cast, where we deep dive into movies and discuss all things cinema.
Hi, I'm Rebecca. Today we'll be discussing the new movie, Five Nights at Freddy's.
Let's get started.
Mike Schmidt is already having a difficult time in between taking care of his sister and trying to cope with the disappearance of their brother a decade or so earlier, when he takes on the job as acting security for Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria. Looking after the abandoned property and decaying animatronics initially seems easy, but once Mike realizes his past intersects with this strange place, he starts to wonder what other secrets can be revealed.
Rebecca, you were excited about this movie because of the casting.
The casting to me is the highlight of this movie. Josh Hutcherson has been severely ignored, basically in between high-profile projects. The last high-profile project I can think of for him is Hunger Games. The only other project I know that he's done right now is Future Man, and that's been ignored by the general public.
Wow, so he's getting a little bit of love in this movie.
Definitely, and I think he's a good choice for the everyman. Mike's character in the games is somebody that you need to be able to slip into the shoes, and I think that was a really tough challenge with this movie is you're bringing in a character that's one-dimensional and you're going to turn him into a three-dimensional character.
And you're meaning one-dimensional because of the video game, correct?
That's correct.
All right, not this not this artistic decision. It's because this movie is based on a video game, correct?
It's based off a video game series.
Oh, a series. Okay.
So, Five Nights at Freddy's initially started as one game. It's quickly ballooned into this franchise that has taken over a lot of different games. There's even extended universe novels discussing the story in these games.
Wow. Well, and I get, I'm middle-aged and, the woman of the day. Never heard of any of this before this movie.
You don't remember me showing you the cute killer cupcake?
I think I would recall such thing. My daughter's come home with a killer cupcake. I say maybe because I'm sure I'll say no, and then I'll be driving home from the studio and go, oh, I remember this. But none of it rings a bell. And granted, I've always thought Chuck E. Cheese is a little bit creepy, but you're like, oh, no, these murders and creepy things are going on. I'm
Conspiracies?
Like, oh. Yeah, I'm like, this is a real thing, apparently.
Oh, yeah, no. What I love about this story is it takes this innate fear that everybody has that your childhood is not as innocent as it looks, and it takes symbols of that childhood to a very specific era of people and just twists them up a notch.
A notch? Hello? Crazy things happen. Crazy. Well, and like you said, you like Josh Hutcherson and Piper Rubio, his sister Abby.
I have not heard of her, but I really enjoyed her acting as well.
And she's younger, and we right now have quite a fascination for the younger kids that are acting.
We have an appreciation.
We do. Exactly. We have an appreciation. Did you feel it's billed as a horror movie? Your thoughts on that? I know.
I was not scared.
Well, and honestly, I don't typically go to horror movies. I had read a little bit about this one oftentimes. I don't read too much. But I'll admit, I watched the trailer, did some research around it, and based on what I had heard about it, I thought, you know what? It's worth a watch. It was a little graphic at points, but it wasn't gory as say, even something like Pulp Fiction to me was a little bit more graphic, or even a John Wick film.
Well, those are really intense movies. I would argue the Haunted Mansion movie this year was definitely a bit more graphic. I know it is PG-13 for graphic violence. For me, it was like mediocre graphic violence. Every once in a while you see like a slight blood spatter. Somebody very clearly is being died. But there's a lot of implications in the story, a lot of creative editing to kind of say what's going on.
And honestly, to me, had it been as graphic as I had originally thought, based on the story, right? These animatronics are coming to kill people, which definitely a fear I can see. I would not have seen the movie.
I would have seen the movie more. I probably would. No, I think...
So there.
Well, granted, I watch infinitely more horror movies than you, which I know is not a small amount.
Well, since I watch none, watch two. Bang! You have me beat right there.
I think the thing is, the younger generation that I see sees the FNAF franchise as kind of this cute, cuddly, spooky thing. And for me, these characters have to be real and present threats in order to take them seriously. Otherwise, you're just running around for no reason. There's no emotional payoff for going, I'm actually terrified for these characters. The only reason I'm terrified for these characters up until near the end of the movie where things get intensely serious is because I know the lore of these games. I know what happens, and it's very frightening when you take the meta layering of these stories, but also the physical layering of these stories. And I just didn't feel that in the movie until the very, very end. And it just feels like a setup to a bit that just pays off that point.
And even then, I didn't even think it paid off even then. To me, there were so many uneven parts in terms of Abby, who was Mike, the primary character, his sister. At one point, she felt, mentally challenged. And they were saying, oh, she's not really talking. She's not, she's hiding in these little forts. She's just non-communicative. And then he asked her this question. I can't remember. And all of a sudden, she's like, well, let me tell you how it really is. And I'm like, well, wait a minute.
I wasn't bugged by that because I felt like he was meeting her on her own terms with that.
Wow. All right. I was like thinking, no, that's not quite it. And it just, in the beginning, I'll be honest with you, the beginning of the movie, like I said, I don't know anything about this. I'm learning. It was an interesting premise. Mike's younger brother goes missing. He carries a lot of guilt. He has dreams and nightmares. He tries to elicit more dreams so he can essentially solve the case or just solve the mystery of what happened to his brother. And I found that pretty compelling. I thought, well, that's a pretty smart thought. And then he's a security guy. Okay, I can go with that. And then it just started to go downhill, which is sad because it sounds like that's why people wanted to see this movie.
Well, and I want our cinema community to comment below. We're not the end all be all. We want to hear from you. Did it succeed as a horror movie in your mind? Or was it just kind of bleh? I think the other problem they ran into, and even though they have the lead designer, writer, creator of the FNAF franchise actively involved with this movie as a producer and writing on the screenplay.
Wow.
This is not a straightforward adaptation of the first story. And I feel like the first story is, as is, a creepier story. Do I like the fact they went into the lore a little bit more? Yes, but there's enough points, spoiler, if you have played all the games, this kind of creates an alternate universe, and they actually do speed up some things in the timeline a little bit.
Well, and then you're making a great point if you know the story. And obviously, it's fair enough to say, I don't know the story. I'm happy to go and learn. However, I know when we were looking to go to the movie, we saw it in Dolby Cinema at our local AMC. Great experience, meaning comfortable chairs, good seating. However, we had looked at showings after ours, and they were packed. So my guess is a lot of people are excited about this movie. And as you said, either know the games, know the lore. So clearly there's an audience for this movie.
The other thing you have to consider is not only is there not a lot of content right now because of the strike.
Sure, that's true.
But for our generation, this is the iconic survival horror series. There's also a lot of creative talent behind the camera that gets people excited. I know for me, one of the biggest things was seeing that Scott Cawthon, who wrote the games, is actually actively involved with the screenplay. I know another thing that you got a little bit excited as you heard a little bit of it was the Newton brothers, who are not related.
Now, what is up with that? Because you think of Coen brothers, they're related. and I remember you said, you're like, they're not related. I'm like, but they're both Newtons.
No, they're but they call themselves the Newton brothers. That's like their artist name.
I'm so literal. I'm like, oh, so there's two of them. They have the same name, but they're not related. Oh, and you're like, no, they're not related, but they call themselves this.
It's so funny. It's literally one of the only things that's on their Wikipedia pages. It says, no, they're not related.
Wow.
They've done music for Mike Flanagan. Mike Flanagan has done a lot of really well-received horror movie projects recently. I know for a lot of our viewers, you might recognize him from The House on a Haunted Hill. I personally recommend him for his adaptation of Stephen King's Dr. Sleep.
Oh, wow. Well, and I think that's a great statement that it's not just who's in front of the camera that makes you excited, but who's behind the camera that makes you excited.
Another thing I want to point out, speaking of behind the camera
Sure.
tech, is the animatronics are just that. They're animatronics. There's no CG used to create these characters.
Which is interesting given the world that we are living in and the potential, meaning they could have made these a lot more complicated, a lot less old school, but this feels like something back from the 80s, like we talked about maybe kind of a Chuck E. Cheese. And even the music, I was laughing. Some of the music that they were playing, right? The little I can't even say it. Yeah, the little animatronics were songs that I remember back in the 80s, and it had that feel to it.
And I'm really excited to see a director that hasn't been well known in the minds of the general public, Emma Tamini, be given this creative opportunity. Emma created a film, it's called The Wind.
Oh, okay.
In fact, she used the same cinematographer, Lynn Moncrief, from that film on this film. That film, as of the time of this recording, is reported to make only a little bit over $25,000.
Oh, wow. So pretty low key then at this point.
I've been consistently recommended The Wind. I'd be curious to see if our cinema community has seen it. If so, comment below and tell us what you think. But I think it's really cool to see more studios take risks with their creative properties like this.
Well, and that's a good point. Knowing that people love the game, it makes sense, right? Mario was recently made into a film. There are video games that are made into movies, and I think sometimes they translate well. I can't speak to whether that was part of it, but I can say there's a lot of love for this movie, and there's a lot of hype for this movie. I know in our area, it is a wide release movie, but every theater, and there are multiple movie theaters in our area, and they're showing it multiple times. I know we had talked about The Anatomy of a Fall that was playing 3 times, understanding it was limited release. But by comparison, I know like our local Cinemark was playing it, oh my goodness, at least 10 plus times. AMC, there's some other local chains around us, same thing, playing it multiple times. So they're anticipating quite a turnout, I think.
I think it's going to be really interesting to see long-term what that turnout looks like as the November box office takes over into the holiday season, especially with films like The Marvels coming into play.
I would agree with that. Do we have any questions from the box?
There's been talk of a video game movie course where video game movies just don't do so well. Do you think the horror genre is a good genre for movies and video games?
I think it's a great genre because it puts you into the mindset of the characters. You take that from a video game and you can translate it to an audience pretty well. I'm really excited for the new BioShock adaptation that's being discussed with Francis Lawrence's direction. And I know one of the video game movies that I remember growing up that I really enjoyed was the Resident Evil series. So I think there's definitely potential, especially with the horror market crossing over with the video game market.
Well, let me ask you a question, Rebecca. And obviously Resident Evil is as it sounds. Are these games geared toward the horror genre, or are they a video game and then that's an angle, or is that something that they adapt at a later date? Meaning, would I know that, oh, that could translate to a horror movie?
You would know pretty well going in. I'm going to say Resident Evil as my big example for this one.
Okay.
You're literally fighting zombies after a virus explodes in a building.
It sounds like that could be a problem.
The other game that I mentioned, it's kind of like a thriller. You start to unravel this mystery, and then there you have these creatures that come in to attack you.
Okay, because I'm thinking back in the day, like Mortal Kombat and things like that. That's not necessarily a horror movie.
I'd say that's more of a character drama.
Exactly, and that's what I'm wondering if they're like, well, like Mario, I don't think they're going to make evil Mario or something.
Then we can make Luigi's Mansion. That'd be a cute movie.
That's true. Okay, so there could be some cute factor. I just didn't know if they were like, well, they're taking some serious liberties to make this scary because that's the genre that maybe that people want to see.
Well, and I'm finding it interesting to see that video game movies are being translated to live action. I know when I was younger, the big trend with video game movies was not necessarily towards live action, but is more geared towards animation styles. I know there was a movie that Square Enix called Final Fantasy Advent Children that kind of filled in some of the gaps with that. Dead Space even did an animated adaptation of their first game.
Do we have any other questions from the box?
You mentioned wasn't a straight adaptation of the first video game in the franchise, and they kind of mixed some other things in, and people might even be getting some new revelations in the story. Do you think that was a smart choice, or should they just straight adapted the first game?
I think if they could have just straight adapted the first game, I think they would have had a stronger movie. That being said, I think they had to give people enough meat to want to keep going and get attached to the characters.
Rebecca, it is that time of the show where I have 5 spooky moths.
There's going to be a lot of them flying away today.
Oof. All right, 1 to 5. What do you think?
This is a 1 in a wing for me.
Ooh, all right. Number 1 reason for the 1 in the wing.
A horror movie is all about consequences and choices. You need your choices to have weight. I was not scared enough with this movie. If I'm more scared, startled, jostled by watching somebody replay this game on my phone late at night, you have a problem.
All right, my 5 moths.
Uh-oh.
They're flying. Many are flying away. I would say for me, it's a 1 moth. For me, obviously, I don't have any goodwill that I'm bringing to the movie, meaning I have history, which may increase my moth rating. However, as a movie that just stands on its own, and I believe a movie should be able to stand on its own, I shouldn't have to know everything about it going in. That's their job to tell me, to explain that to me. But I think a 1 because the beginning, like I said, the beginning of the movie was compelling enough that I was engaged enough that I wanted to see more. It quickly went downhill, however.
When did it go downhill for you? I'm actually curious about that.
I think once they introduced the aunt into the story, the acting to me was pretty poor on that. It felt very cliche. It felt, she's going to take custody of the sister. And
it just felt kind of cartoony.
It felt cartoony. It felt stupid. And once the head started to roll, I started to lose track of obviously who was being killed. However, to me, it started to have less rhyme or reason to it in terms of why is this person dying and this person doesn't? This person's in the same space, but they don't die. They want this person, but they don't want this person. Oh, this person might be connected to, and all of a sudden I was like, oh my gosh, either you're fire hosing me with too much information or you're bogging me down with things that don't make sense to me. And obviously animatronics trying to kill people that's a stretch. But I can go with you on the stretch. However, when it's inconsistent, there was a part where I know it wasn't meant to be funny, but the main character was sitting with this woman that he was trying to get to know, Vanessa. And she said, oh, you don't need these medications. You don't need this. And she had his little pill bottle and she threw it into the canal. And it was supposed to be this big dramatic moment. And they show her and they show him and this little pill bottle is just floating on the top of the water. And I thought, well, that's not too dramatic. I don't think this is going to go well.
Oof. Oof.
It may feel like a small point, but you're saying, when did I see it going downhill? I thought, if that's more comical than dramatic,
you're in trouble.
I'm in trouble. And the fact that they don't see that this isn't the moment they're trying to create tells me I don't think you're going to understand going further. You don't know your movie and you don't know how to make a dramatic moment. And in a horror movie, I think it is about drama and suspense. So I know, like I said, that sounds a little insignificant, but it really was a turn. Thanks for joining us. We're always excited to create experiences to bring our cinema community together.
Watch the notifications for our review of the new movie, Freelance. Then come back to the channel this Saturday for our weekly show, Movies and More, where we will have more movie reviews, the latest Hollywood news, and commentary with snark meant to amuse.
Please remember to like, subscribe, and to share our channel.
If you enjoyed this movie review, you might click the link to check out our review of Anatomy of a Fall, or click the other link to watch last week's show, where we reviewed A Nightmare Before Christmas.
Remember, cinema community movies are better together. Thanks for watching. See you in the next review.